Okay, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, so it's halacha and Tanya. What I want to do tonight, last time we ended up in halacha by the laws of Kaddish, because we finished, davening, some parts of davening, the halachos. Kaddish is a very interesting thing. We just briefly started talking about Kaddish. I know in our circles, women don't say Kaddish, but it's a very, very important tefillah. What's the origin of Kaddish? Why is it in Aramaic? What are the laws of Kaddish? We'll discuss a little bit all these things about Kaddish, the laws of Kaddish and the significance of Kaddish, the origin of Kaddish, and what Kaddish is all about. So we mentioned last week, very briefly, that there's different types of Kaddish. There's half Kaddish, okay, when the Chazan says half Kaddish, that's primarily to separate between one thing and the next, between one part of davening, the next part of davening, between Torah reading after and the Haftorah, whatever it may be. Then you have Kaddish al Yisrael, which is said after learning. When you learn oral Torah, then you say Kaddish Rabbanim, it's called al Yisrael Rabbanim that you hear in the shul saying. Then you have Kaddish Tiskabel. That's one Kaddish that only the Chazan says one per tefillah. That the Tiskabel means that the prayer should be accepted before Hashem. And then you have the main Kaddish, which is actually called Kaddish Yosem, the Kaddish for a mourner. Okay. Now, number one, why is Kaddish originated in Aramaic? So there's two reasons brought down why Kaddish, because the rest of davening really is in Hebrew, not in Aramaic. Why is Kaddish said in Hebrew, in Aramaic? So one reason is because Kaddish is such a holy prayer, the angels are jealous. The angels are jealous when the Jews say Kaddish. Why is it called Kaddish, by the way? It's Gadol is Kaddish. I mean, why is it called Kaddish? Because it says in Allah, these are all halachic aspects. Because Hashem becomes holy when a Jew praises Hashem. When a Jew says, Yizgadal v'Yizkadesh me'Rabba, may his name be great and sanctified. So Kaviyach Hashem becomes great. We discussed last week that Kaddish protects a person, the person you're saying Kaddish for, from the punishment of Gehenna. Or on a yard site, it helps the neshama elevate itself from level to level, like we discussed last week. But so why is Kaddish in Aramaic? So one reason is because the angels shouldn't be jealous. Because the angels are very jealous of the Jews. And the Gemara says, interestingly, the angels, besides Angel Gabriel, do not understand Aramaic. They understand all languages except for whatever reason, I don't know the reason, but they don't understand Aramaic. And therefore, we say Kaddish, we don't want the angels to know that the Jews are praising Hashem because we don't want them to get jealous of us. Another reason Taisa says, and many, many other codifiers say, the reason why Kaddish is said in Aramaic is because that's the language people spoke. And primarily, according to many opinions, it was originated really for kids. Because they couldn't daven for the Amid, they couldn't lead the services. So how did they memorialize their father and mother? In those days, many of them died very young, was by actually saying Kaddish. So it's said in Aramaic because Gemara says the world stands on the Kaddish, and therefore we want to say it in a language that everybody was able to understand. Just like why is the Talmud in Aramaic? Because when they wrote the Talmud, that was the language everybody knew. That was the common language amongst Jews, was Aramaic. So therefore, they wrote the Talmud in Aramaic. Mishnah, by the way, which was written in Eretz Yisrael, was written in Hebrew. But the Talmud, which is in Babel, now it's Iraq, but in Babylon, in Babel, so then the primary language was Aramaic. So that's what they did. Okay, now they bring down a story. It's brought down in many, many different places. Every place a little bit different. There's a story told in the Medrash that Rabbi Kiva, other people say it was Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. They saw a person who was very strange looking, very depressed. Very depressed. The person from the other world. And they asked him, like, what's going on over here? So he told them that he died many years ago. And during his lifetime, he was a big sinner. And he's being punished in Gehenna, for a long time for all the sins that he did. So when Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Yechim and Zaki, the two versions, found this person's child, they tracked him down, and they taught him how to say Kaddish, and he was saved from Gehenna. So that's the importance of Kaddish. It's such an important thing of saying Kaddish that ideally when the Kaddish is being said, you should stand. There's already a halacha aspect. When Kaddish is being said, you should stand. Now it says, if you're sitting, then you really don't have to get up special for Kaddish. But it says when you say Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba, then you should just lift yourself up a little bit out of respect for the holiness of Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba. Okay, and we mentioned that the Kaddish protects a person. It's called Kaddish because it sanctifies Hashem. And it says, the Gemara says in Seit that from the days the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there's no day that's not a bigger curse than the day before it, and the world stands on the Kaddish that people say Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba to. Okay, so Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba is a very, very important thing. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, why couldn't the rabbi say Kaddish for that person? Why only the son? Because the Gemara has an expression, Bara Mezaka Avu, I mean, the child does the merits for the father. Ideally, a person should, if they have sons, the sons should be saying Kaddish, because that's the proper respect and that has the most impact. But again, if there's no son, in our circles, women don't say Kaddish, so then they hire somebody. But the rabbis wanted that the son's merits should be beneficial for the father. Okay? Now, it says in the Gemara, it says, whoever answers Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba with all his might, they rip up all the evil decrees in heaven for the person who's saying it. And Gan Eden is open to him. But what does it mean when the Gemara says with all your might? It doesn't mean to scream Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba. It means with all your kavanah. It says also because voice stimulates, even by Rosh Hashanah in halacha, it says, like during the year, you're not allowed to daven loud because it disturbs people. Rosh Hashanah, even the Shmoneh Esrei, you're allowed to daven a little bit louder. Why? Because when you say something, it stimulates the intent. So they say you should say it a little bit louder, but not crazy screaming, which makes fun of it and fun of the person and so on. Now, just to show how precise Kaddish is, there's an exact amount of words in Kaddish. There's an exact amount of, depending on different texts. For instance, by Nutzach Sfard, the Sfardim Chabad, we say, V'yatzbach perkone v'karev mishiche. By other people, and Ashkenaz, Loshen Ashkenaz, it doesn't say, and they say, but there's an exact number of, just to show the sanctity of these things. There's an exact amount of words. And therefore, it's interesting, on your Ne'ilah, Chabad custom is only by Ne'ilah. Most people do it for the whole Asher Simei Tshuva. We say Le'ela u'le'ela, mikol berchasa v'shirasa. Normally we say Le'ela, above all blessings. By Ne'ilah, or some people again say that's Asher Simei Tshuva. In Chabad we say it only at Ne'ilah. We say Le'ela u'le'ela. Because of that, we're adding a word. So normally during the year we say Le'ela min kol berchasa, from all blessings. So because we're adding a word, and that's going to change the amount of words in Kaddish, instead of saying min kol, 2 words, from all, we say Mikol. So just to show how many, and it says in Kabbalah exactly how many words and letters there are in Kaddish. And therefore, you cannot mix, this Kaddish with that Kaddish. It has to be said, every Kaddish of every text is holy. Sfardim have a much longer Kaddish. Yesh Lamed Rabba, they say a whole extra 2 lines that we don't, the Nusach Ashkenaz doesn't say. But whatever it is, everybody has to say the text and not mix up different texts of Kaddish or davening generally. Now, just to show you the uniqueness of this, we say, in fact, the Mefarshim, I think this Sefer Gesher HaChaim, he goes through the whole Kaddish, defines every single word. Yizgadal, the Yizkadish is based on the Pasik, Shmei Rabba, it's everything is so Kabbalistic important. The exact amount of words in the Kaddish. Like, for instance, we say, La'olam, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach La'olam, or La'olmei Olmaya. Okay? La'olam means the world. La'olmei is 2 words. La'olmaya is 1 word. La'olam or La'olmei Olmaya is 1, 2, and 1, which is 4, correspond with the 4 worlds. Atzilas, B'riyah, Yitzir, Nasiyah. I mean, all these things of Kaddish, you can just talk about Kaddish for probably a week. And all the day. I just want to now go into some of the dinim of Kaddish. Where are you allowed to answer Kaddish and which parts? So, for instance, when somebody is davening the Shmoneh Esrei, or the Sfardim called the Amidah, you do not answer anything, nothing. A person while in Shmoneh Esrei answers nothing. In the middle of Psukei de Zimra, that means from Baruch Shamar until Yishtabach, you answer all of Kaddish. From Yishtabach Baruch Hu until Shmoneh Esrei, you only answer Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba. That's the only part of davening. In fact, in the Sidurim, you have it in the back. There's a whole chart. So I'm not going to go into all the dinim. You can actually look at the chart and see what needs to be said. So this is, generally speaking, when Kaddish is being said, ideally a person should stand. If they're sitting, they're allowed to continue sitting, but they should get up a little bit by Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba, like we said, just to show a little bit of respect of that Amen Yehei Shmei Rabba. I'm not going to go into all the laws, who has precedence in saying Kaddish, and so on and so forth. Okay, we mentioned last time also why we only say Kaddish 11 months, so I'm not going to get into that either. Okay, the next dinim over here in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is the laws of Talmud Torah, the laws of learning Torah. Okay, now the laws of learning Torah are very important because number one, men, let me just give this concept people should be aware. Women do not have an obligation of learning Torah. The mitzvah of learning Torah is not on women. But women have an obligation, not as the mitzvah of learning Torah. Women have an obligation to learn all the laws that they must keep, which means all negative commandments, all mitzvahs which are not connected to time. So just to give you an example what that would mean for a woman would have to learn all of Hilchos Shabbos completely, all the laws of Shabbos, because they're obligated to keep Shabbos. Even though, like it says in Shulchan Aruch, why do women, we'll get there eventually, but why do women have to hear Kiddush? They have a biblical obligation, women, to hear Kiddush, even though Shabbos is a mitzvah connected to time. But because it says Zachar and Shamar, and Shamar means don't transgress Shabbos, Zachar means remember Shabbos to make Kiddush. So the Gemara learns out that if you have to not desecrate Shabbos, which is a negative commandment, which women have to keep, so they're obligated in all the laws of Shabbos, even the positive mitzvahs. Women have a biblical mitzvah to make Kaddish or hear Kaddish or something like that. So they have to learn all halachos Shabbos. They have to learn all the laws of Pesach, because Pesach they have to keep positive and negative mitzvahs. Then they have to learn all the laws of family purity. Plus, they have to learn all the laws in the kitchen that they have to know to know what's a question to ask. It's also something to learn. So even though women don't have an obligation per se, and I'll explain to you what the obligation of a man is that women don't have. So women have plenty of Torah to learn, as the Rebbe said many times. It could take a few lifetimes to learn all the laws that women have to know. So women have an obligation, really biblical obligation, not as far as the mitzvah of learning Torah, but they have a mitzvah to know all those things. In fact, it was just a recent Hayom Yom that the Rebbe writes that when a baby girl is born, you make a mishaberach by the Torah with the naming. So by a boy, you say, Lachnise bevreise shel Avram Avinu, you should bring them into the bris, Bigadel l'Torah or l'chuppah or l'masim Torah, for learning Torah, to get married, and good deeds. Most people in the world, by girls, don't say l'Torah or l'chuppah or l'masim Torah. Say Gadol l'chuppah or l'masim Torah, not Torah. Why don't they say Torah? They say women are not obligated to Torah. So why are you wishing that you go into Torah? In Hayom Yom, the Rebbe brings down, the Rebbe Rashab said that by us in Chabad, we do say Torah, Chuppah, Bais Din. Why? Because the Gemara says in Brachas, in Saita, different places, that with what the women merit, to this, that they send out the husbands and the children to learn, and they wait for them to come home at night. So therefore, they have a share in the mitzvah of learning Torah, and therefore women make the bracha, the brachas of Torah. In the morning, by brachas, they say, Asher b'chabanu, b'harev, all those things. So women don't have an... Now, men, a very complicated concept, men have a halachic obligation to learn Torah 24/7. A biblical obligation, a person has an obligation to learn Torah 24/7. But the Torah allows you to eat, to sleep, to do business, to be healthy, whatever it may be. But women don't have a mitzvah that, because technically, it's not realistic, but hypothetically, if a woman knows everything she needs to know, which, by the way, years ago, there were no schools for women. Okay, where did Jewish girls learn everything they needed? They were home with their mothers. The mothers, they weren't working mothers in those days. There's no such thing as a non-working mother, but not outside of the home. The women raised the girls at home and to teach them everything they needed to know in Yiddishkeit. That's where they learned it. Then, about close to 100 years ago in Poland, this lady, Sarah Schneider, came around and said, it's not happening anymore. Women are not teaching their children that we need to make schools for girls. And she was successful. She got all the Jewish leaders to make schools for girls. And therefore, every group of Jews have schools for girls. It's an interesting thing, which, by the way, there's two opinions in the Mishnah. One opinion says a man is obligated to teach his daughter Torah. Another opinion says you shouldn't teach him Torah. You shouldn't teach the girls Torah. So most opinions today hold up you're supposed to teach girls Torah. But I give you an example. In certain circles, like in Satmar or such types of places, they don't teach the girls Torah. When girls go to school, they teach them basic dinim that they need to know. And they teach them, believe it or not, in school, they teach them home economics. How to cook, how to bake, how to run a home. That they teach them halacha that they need to, but they don't learn like Chumash or Tanah or Navi. They don't learn those things. Or if they do, very, very minimal. But the halacha in our world is that women do learn Torah. In fact, there's a very famous story. Now, the Rebbe's mother, her father belonged to the Baal Shem Tov's group, and the Baal Shem Tov wanted women to learn Torah. But her husband, now the Rebbe's father, originally was not amongst the Chassidic group. And his own wife, Rivka, her name was learning Torah without her husband even knowing about it. And she was an extremely learned person. But her husband didn't know about it. So one time the story is told, the previous Rebbe brings us down in the memoirs, in the Zechrenis. One time they're walking home from Shul Shabbos in the shtetl, and they're all carrying their talesim with svarim, and the men and the women were walking, and somebody came running that the Erev broke. The Erev broke. And the question now, nobody knew what to do. Not the big scholars. They knew learning in Gemara, but they didn't know practical halacha. So Rivka's father, I forgot what his name was. Rivka's father, all the men they didn't know what to do. So Rivka's father turned to his daughter and said, "What's the halacha?" And she had no choice. Then her husband found out that she knew how to learn. And she told them the halacha, what to do. They should pass the books every less than 4 cubits and then give it to somebody else and somebody else. And she told them exactly what to do. The men didn't know, but they had to rely on her. So they came home, they looked it up, and they saw that she was right. So even in the Alter Rebbe's times, there was a whole debate if women should be learning Torah or not. But in our times, the Rebbe definitely wanted the girls should be learning Torah in school. And even before, there's the Minig Yisrael is that women are learning Torah and they need to learn Torah because they need to learn the halachos that they need to keep. So again, they don't have a mitzvah per se of learning Torah, but they have a mitzvah to learn everything they need to know, which, like we said, the Rebbe said would be enough for a few lifetimes. Okay, so really after davening, it says in the Gemara, you should go from Beis HaKnesses to Beis HaMedrash. You should go from the shul to learn a little bit after davening, because even a business person also has an obligation to learn Torah. Sometimes the Gemara, the Gemara in Shulchan, there's a whole thing called halachos Talmud Torah. There are many, many books written on the laws of Talmud Torah. But basically, the halacha is even a business person who has no time officially to learn has to learn Perek Echad Shachris, the Perek Echad Arvis. He has to learn a little bit during the day and a little bit at night. It's a biblical obligation. And in fact, the Gemara says a guy will come along and say, I couldn't learn Torah because I was too poor. The Gemara says, Hillel Machayev Aniyim. Hillel was a very poor man, as we know, the famous Hillel, before he became the Jewish leader. He didn't even have money. He had to get on the sky roof, and the whole story with Hillel. So a guy's going to come up to heaven, and one of the first questions they asked him, when you come up to heaven, Kavata item la Torah. Did you set aside times to learn Torah? So Hillel's guy's gonna come along and say, I was too poor, I had no time, because I had to make a living. So he said, you were not poorer than Hillel, and Hillel learned Torah. So Hillel's gonna obligate the poor people. Another guy's gonna come upstairs and say, I was too rich. I was running an empire of money all around the world. I had no time. So they say Rabbi Elazar ben Chisma is a very, very wealthy man, extremely wealthy. He had thousands of cities and thousands of this and thousands of that. And he was very wealthy, and yet he was a Tana of the Mishnah. So he's going to obligate the rich people. So Gemara says it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. Everybody has to have time to learn Torah. Okay? Now, another thing, it says that people that don't necessarily have time to learn Torah, so they become what's called Tamchin Temeich, the term Shabbos. Taimche meaning Taimche Torah means people that support the learning of Torah. In fact, the Gemara says there are many tzaddikim. Hillel had such a partnership with his brother, or the Torah says Yisachar and Zvulun, the two tribes. Yisachar learned Torah. Zvulun was in business, but Zvulun supported Yisachar. So it says if a person can't learn, what should they do? First of all, they could learn. Today, you can learn in any language, whatever you want. Years ago, they didn't have translated stuff. If a guy couldn't read Hebrew, he couldn't learn. So then he had an obligation to support somebody learning Torah. But today, everybody has an obligation to learn Torah. There's no excuse because any language you want around the world, you can have those things in the books of Torah and written and all that stuff. Okay, so you have to do something. By the way, another interesting thing. In halacha, it says like this. What happens if you have a set time to learn? Let's say you always learn from 10 to 10:30. That's your time of learning every day. Or you go to a class. And one day you miss it. The emergency came up. You weren't able to learn from 10 to 10:30. Guess what? In Shulchan Aruch it says you have a debt to repay that half hour that you didn't learn. You have an obligation to pay it up. You all got a time. This was Hashem's time. You gave him time to learn Torah. Now you're not learning Torah. You can't just get out of it. In Shulchan Aruch it says you have to pay back. He says, what happens if somebody has something very, very important to do? So then they have an obligation to pay it back. Whatever it says in Shulchan Aruch, you have an obligation to pay back that time for learning Torah. I just want to say one more thing before we go to Tanya, and that is part of learning Torah is the respect for Svarim. For instance, it says in halacha, we're going to continue this next time because we're not just starting it. If let's say you have a sefer and you're learning it, okay, and you have to walk out, you're not allowed to leave the sefer open. It's disrespectful to leave a sefer open. So what you need to do is close it. Or some people have a minute that put something on top of the sefer. Just to be respectful, people have to make sure that Svarim are not upside down. Many times you go in the show, people leave Sidurim open, or the Sidurim are upside down. You have to make sure part of the learning Torah is when you respect it. Because when you respect Torah, God helps you understand his infinite wisdom. So if you're learning Torah, you're not allowed to go out of the room and leave the sefer open, no matter why you're leaving. You still have an obligation to make sure that the sefer is respected. You're not allowed to have things on top of a sefer. You're not allowed to put papers on top of a sefer. Things you have to respect. In fact, next week there's a particular order, by the way, in halacha, because we're going to go to Tanya now. But there's a particular order in halacha. What goes on top of what? Different form. You have a chumash, you have a navi, you have a mishnayos, you have a siddur, you have a tanya, you have other svarim. The whole process in halacha dinim, what goes on top of what? And in fact, just to finish off with one statement, they say that Tzemach Tzedek had a Gemara, a set of Shas, that he learned, and trust me, he learned a lot. And they were mamish like brand new. They're mamish like brand new. He was very meticulous in that to bend the pages, not to rip it. That's part of the respect of Talmud Torah, and that helps the person learn Torah. Okay, let's go to Tanya.